You're listening to the Podcast Detroit Network. Visit www.podcastdetroit.com for more information.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 45 of Storyteller Conclave. This is a show all about helping you run the best tabletop role-playing game that you can. Whether you're a new storyteller or dungeon master learning the craft, or an experienced storyteller looking to take your game up to the next level. I am Sarah.
And I'm Rob.
How we doing, Rob?
You know, I'm not doing too bad.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
You're we played your game last weekend.
We did.
And had a blast.
It was
different. I don't mind saying myself.
Thank you. Yeah, I think what I was going for worked out really well, and then you guys wanted to keep going, so I made it work.
Yeah.
So,
exploring the ruins of an old creepy castle in a post-apocalyptic world, and
yeah.
Going into the bowels and trying to get an ancient machine going again with a big steam boiler that I powered with a fire elemental. It was good times.
Yeah. Little
bit
bit
around.
different. I wanted that room to be a little bit more than it was, but I at least visually, and but I think it worked out in the end. I think everything worked out in the end. So we've got more scenarios come up. It'll be fun. But
you also used some of those printout PDF like dungeon tile things.
Yeah, I saw when I originally posted some of that stuff. I thought it was a really great idea, and I've kind of been following the guy on YouTube to see some of the new stuff, and I'm gonna be pulling some more of that stuff out because it's just too easy. Mm-hmm. It's really cool. It's simple. I think everybody should do it. At least a little. I think it was in 8 hours. I put together a full keep with 2 floors.
Yeah, right.
And most of that was just me transitioning from like a printed map that I had made into a functional room by room map. Mm-hmm. But I mean, now that I've got it down, I could probably do it in half the time.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And he's got a bunch of stuff where he talks about being able to quick create dungeons and stuff. But honestly, it's cardboard. It was leftover cardboard I had sitting around. The most expensive part was me printing because my printer went bad, so I had to go to Kinko's.
Oh, my God.
So that was the most expensive part about that whole process. But, $50 later, I had a full keep and extra parts.
Yeah, exactly.
So
it looked great. It played great. Mm-hmm. So
I was really surprised.
You can find some of those pictures. By the way, I think I posted some to both Twitter and to Instagram.
Yeah,
so if you want to check those out. Also, I think there was definitely some discussion and some pictures up on our Discord. If you're not a member of our Discord, you can find that link on our Twitter at @ST_conclave.
Yep. And for those of you who join, there is just a welcome that comes in. Just say something into it for us, and we will get you set up as a listener. We just do that to make it easy because there's a lot of bots that just jump on and off, and we don't want to have a bunch of bots sitting in our channel.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly.
So anyways, we got a show.
Yeah, so we're talking today about big combat.
Yeah,
we're talking like
stuff.
Ships and giant monsters and giant armies clashing against each other. Things a little more than a handful of goblins in a dungeon.
Yeah, we talked about scope. Now we're going to talk about scale. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times when I think of scale, I think a lot about like moving from individual miniatures to something like Warhammer Fantasy, where you've got a block of them, and you're talking about stuff like that, and you're moving whole blocks and stuff. A lot of times there's a lot of the historical combat where they're doing that same thing. It's units moving across the
rank
board.
And file. Yeah. You've got 50 troops at a time in a big block. Yeah.
You might have artillery units that are doing something to an area, or suppression and things like that. And that's not really what you want to get into when you're thinking about like role playing.
Can I tell you that's actually what got me into Warhammer in the first place?
Really?
Yeah. Okay. I was running a campaign back in the day, and there was a necromancer that had destroyed an entire city. It was Crowley's background.
Oh yeah,
from your game. And I decided that somewhere in my world storyline that basically there was a bunch of like good guys, essentially groups of paladins and knights and whatnot, that they were going to go take the city back from the undead.
Sure.
And so I kind of wanted to play those battles out. And I wanted, the PCs to be commanders of that and such like that. Mm-hmm. And I started looking into, well, how do you handle mass combat? And this was back in like the 3.5 days.
Yeah.
So I was having a lot of problems with it, and then I realized, like, oh, hey, Warhammer is a mass combat style thing.
Yep. So you just kind of threw some of those rules in there.
I didn't end up actually playing out that part of my D&D campaign, but I did end up accidentally stumbling into Warhammer and Mordheim along with it. So.
Yeah, and having a compelling, expensive existence.
Really expensive.
But it got you into painting more?
I was already painting. I was already painting the pewter D&D miniatures.
But more.
But a lot more and a lot cooler miniatures and stuff like that than just, your $3 pewter pieces.
Yeah.
So, definitely.
No, I think it definitely had a place for it. But, so I know that, like, some of the systems I've played have some pieces in there, and we kind of go from that concept. I'm thinking of kind of starting with the whole mass miniature thing. Because, like, I know 7th Sea has stuff for ships, and the system's different. And it's not so much mass combat, but group combat in the ship-based combat. So when you're talking, like, ship to ship, instead of having one person controlling the ship, they actually break it up so that each player can take a position.
Right.
Someone controls the sail, someone controls the gun, someone controls the rudder, someone controls, works on the hull, someone has the crew. And each one of your attributes kind of sits as a flare, toward that. So, like, maybe the person who has the best panache is the one who's working the rudder, and that's their dice affect that. And there's some bonuses they get for the type of ship and things like that. But it basically gives them a position to work with, and I think that works really well and keeps everybody kind of moving together. They're making the roles as a team.
Sure.
There's a couple other systems that do that. I want to say there's one of the Star Trek systems does that as well, because you have, like, Helm and things like that as well.
For as big of a Trekker as I am, I've never actually played a Star Trek game.
But at least then you're keeping everybody involved, and I think that's a really important part of keeping table cohesion.
Yeah.
You don't want people just falling asleep at your table, which we do get when you have people who are combat monkeys during a social event or vice versa.
Exactly.
So I think that's something you have to think. But when you start stepping into stuff like 5th edition, which is already, and I'll say it, D&D as a whole has been rules medium. It's always sat in that bridge point. It's not Palladium rules, and it's not like,
Apocalypse World.
Yeah, where, or even something as simple, I'm not
WR&M.
WR&M was the one I was thinking of.
Yeah.
So, where you've got these two very diametrically opposed systems, you've got them sitting in the middle where you need a certain level of rules to apply to it. So you've got, like, in 5th edition, the Unearthed Arcana mass combat rules that got put out, which I'll drop a link for. But which are neat, but again, they're D&D rules. You look at it, there's CRs, there's action tables, there's economy that's involved in it.
Right.
It doesn't lend itself to everybody doing the work so much, but there are rules for it to include in there. And it does, like, there are ways to change the initiative, and there are some teamwork things you do. You're right, Knox. But there's also a lot of home brews that people have done within that system as well. I kind of had one where they had basically taken that and changed a little bit about it in how your attributes affect things. Like charisma changes the morale, your dexterity changes initiative, your intelligence changes unit size. The actions are a little different in economy.
Yeah.
But then you also have the other one that I sent you, which was this one on Reddit that I found.
Oh God! And it was. I mean, like I said, I was telling you at dinner today. I was like, I read that entire thread, and it's this brilliantly broken down thing about, like, how armies have certain, like, troop values to them, but then of course their readiness and their their equipment and their experience and
that
stuff
creates
like that.
A value.
It creates a certain value, and you multiply it by this, but divide it by that, and then you consider, like, well, these guys are defending a keep, so they've got a fortification,
right?
And it takes all these things into account and then breaks it down into these different phases with different objectives.
Yeah, it's numbers heavy.
And it was really numbers heavy, but it was really detailed, and it was a really good way of looking at combat.
Yeah.
And I had two thoughts when looking at it, and I thought, this is brilliant, and also I never want to use this.
Yeah. The one thing that I got out of it that I really liked was the milestones.
Yes.
And I thought that was a different thing in it. And I'm going to get more into that a little later.
Because the objective of a battle isn't always just smash the other guy into submission.
Correct. And that's 9 times out of 10 not why your PCs are there.
Yep.
They're not commanders running the battle for that.
Exactly. If they were, you'd be playing Warhammer.
Right. Mm-hmm. But that's not the only mass combat we're talking about.
Sure.
When we were talking about things like changing mechanics, where you're saying it's a not just a scale difference, but it's a design difference. Mm-hmm. Mech Warrior was an example you gave. That there's literally BattleTech and Mech Warrior are two different system sets.
You've got two different role playing systems for them. At least you did back in the day. I don't know what is it Catalyst Games that's got the BattleTech license now.
Yep.
I don't know what Catalyst is doing with it, but back when it was FASA, you had BattleTech, which was what you were doing in the battle mechs. It was battle mech versus battle mech combat, and then you had Mech Warrior, which is a completely different role playing system that took care of all of your out of the mech combat, or all of your out of the mech stuff in general. It was a lot more akin to your regular traditional tabletop role playing game. You played a character, you had stats, you had equipment, and you navigated that world around there. And I thought, especially back in that day, that was a really brilliant way of going about it, because then you could kind of have your cake and eat it too.
Right. I mean, whereas like in 7th Sea, they kind of bring mass combat right in with the normal line of things by basically just changing the way effectively you're fighting. So brutes are a way to have mass combat where you're literally just stepping through. Because again, characters, I mean, look at Legolas. Like when he goes into a combat, he's not fighting one other dude. He's fighting a whole group of people because that's what he can do.
Right.
He's a hero.
He and Gimli are keeping count because they're killing that many dudes.
Right. I mean, Princess Bride.
Yep.
Inigo Montoya literally just steps down a hallway
and
murdering.
Step.
And now he's standing in front of the
10 of your guys are dead.
Right. And they even say that, it's like I could take on maybe 10. Well, that leaves 20 for me,
Yeah.
And that's the thing is that that's the kind of logic you have to put behind some of that. So it changes why they're there and what they're doing.
Yeah.
And then you have things like Urban Shadows where, you can talk about mass combat, but you're talking about it. The dice really aren't hitting the table much.
Right.
Involving that.
It's more of an agreed upon scene.
And then
happening.
consequences.
And then and the crowd size might be a complication in the scene, but it's never a numerical factor.
Right. But that in moving along that same lines, then you have what we were talking about before, which is where it's more of a scene. It's the background.
Right.
It's not actually what's going on. Like you look at scenes like
the setting is in a battle.
Right. You're trying to get from point A to point B in a battle. So how do you pay? I mean, you got a kaiju attacking a city. You're involved in that plot. There's a reason why that kaiju is there, attacking that city, but you're not going to do anything to that kaiju.
Right.
You're literally an ant running at its feet trying to get away.
And this isn't even a matter of it has 1 million hit points and you only do 20 damage a hit.
Right.
This is you are not damaging it.
Correct.
You will not alter its path.
You are barely a paper cut in its existence.
You are utterly insignificant to it. You are one ant amongst thousands.
Yes. So in those situations, you really do have to paint out the battle in a different way and how things are being affected. But realistically, the results of each one of the goals that are set forth are only affecting the player's portion of that story.
Yeah.
And movies do a good job of portraying this. I mean, you'll never see, unless it's a single action hero type of movie where that person's going to punch out the kaiju somehow. Ant-Man's going to grow to 600 feet, equaling slightly larger than the size of the kaiju and punch it.
Yeah.
Okay, great. That's wonderful. But 9 times out of 10, that's not going to be the case.
Real quick, y'all know what we're talking about when we say kaiju, right? Like we're talking about
Godzilla.
Like the word comes from Pacific Rim. I don't know if it comes from Pacific Rim, but that's the one they used in Pacific Rim.
It was heavily used in Pacific Rim.
Yeah, where the giant Godzilla-like monsters.
Yeah,
that's what we're talking about. So
the what?
the what?
The giant monsters. The what?
Totally, man. The what now?
Exactly. But I think that Rifts does a good job of talking about this with MDC versus SDC,
Oh, God,
mega
yeah.
damage
It was
versus standard damage.
The coolest thing and also the worst thing in Palladium.
But it made sense. Like, if your
it
players
did.
are trying to get to a point where they can fire an MDC weapon to
Right.
fight the MDC thing, I will give another good
All right,
example.
hold
of
on,
this.
hold on.
Okay, go ahead.
Before we continue, we need to remember that not everybody here has played Palladium.
I will get to
especially
that.
not everybody has played Rift. So let's define some terms before we start going off on how great or baleful MDC is.
I'm not going to talk about that, but I'm going to talk about the framing of what it is. So think of MDC as a tank shooting a cannon round. It is going to blow apart basic things like humans.
Typical things, typical people
Yes.
have something called SDC. That is structural damage capacity.
Correct.
Okay. It's their ability to maintain or to sustain
cohete.
structural damage.
Things that do SDC are machine gun bullets.
Regular pistol bullets.
knife.
A knife. Yes. A punch.
But
may
if
do
you
some
fire
SDC.
a cannon, like a cannon,
It will vaporize
Rise.
something, and that is MDC, which is mega damage.
now there's
capacity.
a 100-to-1 ratio
It
there.
is literally 100-to-1 ratio.
But honestly, it's more than just a 100-to-1 ratio. That being said, when you look at something like, and I'll give this example, Halo. Most people know the dude in Halo, Master Chief.
Yeah,
and-
Halo's a pretty cool guy.
Yeah. In all of his stories, he is fighting through a war. He affects things at strategic points, but for the most part, stuff is happening around him. He's coming to finish goals, as he's stepping through those things. But a good example is there's a huge fight going on, and he gets, their ship is going to get destroyed by this bomb, and he's like, well, I'm going to go give it back to them. Right? And so
He just grabs the bomb and
he's
jumps
gotta
out the
fight
airlock.
his way through the ship to the bomb, and then jumps out and does this miraculous thing where he basically drops it off back on their ship.
At least we think, because Halo 2 just ends there.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, I'm still salty about that all
that's
these
all
years
right.
later.
Well, it's fine.
That was the ending?
Yeah. But the whole idea is that he isn't affecting the other parts of the battle at all. He's not directing the other ships. He's not talking about the cannons that are being fired. His shooting these grunts or those elites aren't changing the war.
Yeah.
It's part of the scenery around him while he's moving.
Right.
Until he
They're
gets to
obstacles-
a milestone.
Right. There are obstacles between him and his actual objective, which is rescue this person or shut this thing off or whatever. He's not thinning their ranks in any significant manner.
And another good example of that is like Lord of the Rings. When you see in the greater battles, it had nothing to do with the fact that Legolas takes down a freaking elephant. Okay, he took down an elephant. That's great. But I assure you, that is one of a dozen or more.
Probably 100 or so, yeah.
Right? There are milestones that have to happen to make changes occur on the field, but in the grand scheme of things, they're getting to a point. That's all they're doing.
What I kept thinking about when we were outlining this was Les Miserables of Marius trying to get to Cosette in the middle of the French Revolution.
Exactly.
Look, the French Revolution is happening whether Marius is there or not.
Yes.
Marius is just trying to rescue his girlfriend and maybe make it out alive with her,
Right.
and that's all that's going on there,
So I'm going to try and scale this back in a mind frame of that if you plan on doing something like mass combat in the minutia number sense, there's nothing wrong with that as long as your players are on board with it.
Yeah.
Because they might be all for that. They may be all about strongholds and men and cannons and tactics and figuring out how their player can be the best commander at that. That's great. Do that thing. But if you're planning on just having a battle, don't go that far. And I found a really good article that I told you about that kind of broke down some points to think about. And I think these are a fantastic list when talking about mass combat. And I'll put a link up there, but it was, I think it's like Yamri, and it was from RPG on Stack Exchange. And I want to kind of go through these because I think both of these worked really well for us. Number one, establish the PC's goal in the battle. You can't forget that the battle has a purpose but your PC's motivation may be different.
Like I said, Marius is just trying to rescue Cosette.
Yep.
does not care about the French Revolution necessarily.
Right.
He's just there.
Right. Three Musketeers, Disney. They're trying to get to Cardinal Richelieu.
Yep.
The whole fight with all of the Musketeers and the guard is literally a backdrop. Yes, they're going to take out some on their way there, and they eventually are going to have to fight a henchman because he's going to be a bump in the road, and there's going to be more bumps before they get to him. But that's the goal. Like, one of them has to save the king and queen. That's a thing they have to do. But then as they move through that scene, there are milestones that are affecting the battle in different ways, but they're not directly involved. Like, they're not fighting 60 guys on their own. They're fighting a few people, but moving through.
Right.
Lord of the Rings does a good job of this as well. You might have steps in a battle to get to a certain position or to stop something. The Battle of Helm's Deep.
Stopping the guy with the torch.
Exactly. Yep. Like you got to take that guy out legless. That's a milestone right there. All the other players can't get to him, so that he is doing direct shots and having to handle that situation while they're supporting.
Exactly.
In some way. That next one, assure the players have competence to attain their goal. If they are just fighting to win the battle, they need something different to differentiate them from the sea of regular troops. And this is where, if you're stepping into a combat situation, not everyone is a commander. Not everyone is a berserker. Not everyone is those things.
Right.
They have to be competent to what they're doing, so the scenes that they're involved in need to help for that compensation. And I think that you can really lose people with that part there. If they think it's just going to be a giant combat scene over and over and over again, your non-combat people are just going to get weak and really not be involved. And
also, I mean, typically, I don't know what your experience is, but combat can get really dragged down.
Oh, so much.
We're talking, 30 seconds of combat can take 3 hours.
What was it? You do a 6-hour journey in 1 minute, or a 1 minute battle in 6 hours.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Yep.
So, this is the one that kind of got me, which was treat the battle like a scene that surrounds the players.
And that was the big one. That was the big one.
Do not treat that as a combat encounter, but rather a puzzle that can be solved through leadership, cunning, and violence. And that right there kind of sums up my feelings about mass combat when it comes to RPGs.
Yes.
Especially tabletop ones. You are a point in a scene. Things are happening around you. You're basically setting the stage each time that happens to show what is these group of people doing and why.
Yeah.
In this point right here in the scene. Are they using some kind of leadership? Are they sneaking their way through something? Or are they literally just tearing through like 20 guys to get to this side of the room? Really, that's up to them, how they want to handle that.
And I think like setting things in a mass combat, you have a lot of great opportunities to do things like, okay, so your PCs are someone special. The enemy forces may send out a champion to deal with your characters. And so then you've got this scene on a battlefield where, the cave troll or the ring wraith comes out, and your hero PCs have a opportunity to square off mano a mano with this enemy champion. And then you've got your standard encounter there. You've got a PC versus one or a small handful of champions. And then the environment becomes the battlefield.
Right. It's
where they're almost like terrain. You have great opportunities there for things like lair actions.
Oh, totally.
Or like errant arrows or swords,
or bombardment is coming in.
Exactly. Or if somebody maneuvers too close to the edge of an amorphous bubble of no man's land, they might catch an odd sword or something like that, or it might count as difficult terrain as, soldiers in that area are also kind of getting entangled with them.
Exactly.
But more or less, when the enemies see the champion coming and they see you guys coming, they're going to clear the dance floor for you.
I mean, it is the field combat with the trolls. And I think that's a perfect example because when you watch those in movies, it feels like there's a space, an unknown bubble of things that are going on. There's nobody stepping in to stab them in the back. There's that happens at the end of the scene.
What was it? What was her name? Aowen? When she stabs the ring wraith in the face. Spoilers, by the way. And, I mean, that whole scene, I mean, they have time for dialogue. They have time for, the him, with her on her knees, and he's just like, no man can kill me.
It was a pivotal scene because the
monologuing.
King is,
That's what we have time for. Monologuing.
The king gets fallen and crushed by the horse. So he's laying there, and then she has to rescue him, and you have another character involved trying to do an aid action. So, I mean, it's literally D&D, but around them is this difficult terrain that's happening. And I think that's a perfect example of it. I think that's a great way of looking at it. So again, you don't want people to feel that they're having to deal with all of the combat, but just the scene that they're working within. And this is the part that I think is the step away that is different than what I think most people think, and that is ensure the party goals can be met regardless of the outcome of the battle.
Right.
It isn't about making their goals impossible. So if it's certain that like the orcs are going to win and take the castle and hold it, okay, great.
Are you still going to be able to rescue the princess?
Right. Can you still get the king out to safety? Sure. There are ways to do that. So I think that is the part. Like, why are they there?
Yeah.
Are they getting a message out? Because that needs to happen? Do they have to get to a certain space and defend it for so long before reinforcements arrive? Even though a loss may occur because of consequences of certain actions, it doesn't mean that their goals can't be achieved in some way.
Yeah, I think it's really great. I think it's really great. And honestly, like just listening to that list makes me like excited to try some of these things.
Yeah.
I don't even have a real place where there's going to be like a massive battle necessarily in my story, but there might be. I don't know. Maybe have an excuse there.
Well, I got two more. One more really, and the second one is just
right.
Look it up. But that is assume that they act as a team as they normally would. Don't force players into tediously adhere to the battle grid or roll dice all the time.
Oh yeah.
And this is where it's like, okay,
basically don't treat it like a combat encounter.
Correct. So like if they've got to get from one side of this, like, hey, what are you guys doing? You just saw a flaming pitch hit the second tower ascender, and your whole group in there is on fire. You guys have to go put that out. And they're like, no, we're going to sacrifice that. We're going to make for the west hole in the wall, in the breach of the wall. Okay. So you guys are crossing the field for that? Yeah. All right. Everybody give me deck saves for basically avoiding arrows and some of the flying debris that's coming across the field, some of the mortars. And then like, oh, okay, we had 2 that failed. All right. Healer, I need you to just expend 2 spell slots for heals. That's it. That's done.
Yep.
Because again, it's assumed that that's what's going to happen. You're not just going to let those people suffer. And in some way, whether it's one other person getting injured, covering someone, or shield blocking, or whatever, healing spells are going to get used.
Right.
So
like none of you are going to die off screen on a battlefield somewhere. It's going to be a villain that kills you. It's going to be a dramatic moment. It's not going to be like, oh, you failed a deck save in the middle of a mass combat, and oh, sorry, you got hit by a rock. Well, that's it.
But then like maybe when they get to that break in the wall, a troll steps out. So now you have an action and a scene that they're going to have to get through. Maybe there's going to be a minor henchman there to monologue and have a scene with. But again, you don't need them fighting across that whole battle map.
Right.
There's no adventure there.
Yeah.
That's just a moment of passage,
Knox in the box in the live chat. He's asking, basically, you just place obstacles and let them deal with it. However, yes.
Yes and no. I would say the way milestones should work is you have an idea of how the battle is going to go.
Right.
They may have set like if this is let's take it a couple different ways. Let's say the battle is something that they don't know about or don't have any control about. It's the king that they're working for is being assaulted. His castle is being assaulted by orcs and goblins, right?
Sure.
So that battle is going to happen. The king's going to be doing his thing with his guards, and the goblins and orcs are going to be doing their things, trying to assault and take it over. Whatever reason that is. Now, what is your plot? Why are they there? What are they doing there? Were they in the town working, and now they've got to get out? Or do they still have to complete whatever they were doing and then get away? Are they going to help defend? Like, that is the plot. That is what is going on. This is literally just background. So as events occur, the breach of the outer wall, the flooding of the city with the goblins, the, sewers getting, pushed out, bombardment of the Great Hall, each one of those things are things you as the storyteller are going to have scenes in the background that you're going to be telling them about, this scenery that's occurring.
Yep.
And throughout that, as they move through their situation, you're going to come up with moments where they have to pause and actively do something.
And honestly, it's not really much different than a dungeon crawl at that point, because instead of just going into a dungeon and moving through rooms and surpassing traps and fighting monsters to get to maybe the treasure at the end, your treasure may be something more more intangible than that, like escape the city alive, or extricate the princess so that you can get her out safely, or something like that.
And Knox's idea. They came to you. It's actually your fault that the king is being attacked. Great. So the king's like, oh, they're here for you. Well, I have two choices. Either I put you in a cell and take care of my city, or I just hand you over. So what's it going to be? Mm-hmm. And now you have, okay, do they persuade the king to keep them?
Yeah.
Fine. You're going in a cell because this is your fault. We'll deal with you after I take care of this scum. Okay. Well, that's not going to go the way the king wants it to regardless. So now you're in a cell, and we now have a beginning of an adventure again.
Yeah.
But again, you getting out of that cell is no different than Johnny Depp trying to get out of the bowels of his own ship, screaming, "Stop blowing up my ship!"
Yep. Or trying to get out of the keep.
Yep.
While the Black Pearl is bombarding it with
exactly. And
that's actually a great example. Of the war going on around you as a set piece. Is that opening scene? Mm-hmm. Not really opening, but it's in the first half hour or so, right? Yeah. But yeah, the whole pirate attack on Port. Not remembering it now. I'm a terrible nerd. But anyways, you know what I'm talking about.
Yes. So the whole part behind it is, again, they're just moving through the scene. And this is all flavor that sits around them. And how you calculate that flavor, how they get involved with their scenery can shift based upon things and attitudes and who they are. I mean, if one of them has a military background, as far as D&D is concerned, maybe they can redirect soldiers. Maybe they can bolster some defense in an area. And that alters some of the course of what's going on and make things easier for them. That's no different than being able to seduce a couple guards to get past them and closer to the chamber that you're trying to steal something from.
Exactly. Well, I look at the orc troop movements. What are they doing? Well, roll me a history check real quick. Okay. Well, you notice that they're using what's typically referred to in military school as the Hawkins maneuver, and they're going to be attacking this, but they're going to be feigning to this flank. So if you put your troops over there, all right, fine. I bark at some guards. Go over there. Okay. Well, great. You've just used your character's skills to resolve a complication, and you didn't get involved in the mass combat.
Right. And now you're able to move on.
Exactly.
Or worse yet, you are a military person. And as you're going through, lieutenant falls or a captain falls, and the next lieutenant sees you, grabs you, and says, "Captain, what do we do?" And you're like, "Oh no, I'm the highest ranking guy in the room now."
Oh, honey, no, I'm not your mom.
Exactly. That is exactly the way it goes. Yep. So, and that's the kind of stuff that you can have.
Port Royal.
Yeah, I saw that.
Thank you.
The scene from
you'll get there.
It's gonna Solo.
I believe in you.
Solo, where literally they're a bunch of shysters looking like military people working their way across the field, explaining what they need to do, and they're like, "Well, you're currently top rank," and he kind of looks down and goes, "Oh yeah, I guess so. Well, we're gonna do this, and you guys are gonna go this way, and circle around." He's like, "Okay," and whatever, maybe it worked, maybe it didn't, but either way, they get back to camp, and there he is with his crew looking to steal a transport to get off planet, So it's those kinds of moments where you realize that they're not where they belong, and they're lying about their position. I mean, they stole uniforms. So,
but that's a plot complication for them to work out.
Exactly. So,
I want to talk about kaiju.
Go for it.
I want to talk about kaiju because I've mentioned before on the show I'm a big fan of the Dark Souls series.
Oh yeah.
And to me, I mean, pretty much every boss in every Dark Souls game is massive.
Okay.
Even the man-sized ones,
Are giants.
Iodex Gundyr, Ornstein and Smo, are still giant compared to the player character.
Sure.
At least a whole head, a person and a half taller than you.
Nice, Knox.
It always kind of got me that, like, especially on certain bosses where you're just kind of hacking at their ankles with whatever sword you've got going on.
Right.
And I mean, that's definitely one way of going about it. And it makes you feel very epic when you're fighting something like that. And I mean, it's not really a big kaiju necessarily. It's not something that's going to be destroying an entire town.
Right.
But if you've got something of that scale, it's definitely on an epic size of battle.
Right.
And the miniatures, like I would constantly think back to the one of the plots that ran in the first season of Critical Role, where they fought Thordak the Cinder King, and the miniature was the size of a house cat. I swear to God. It was an ancient red dragon.
There you go.
And the thing stood probably a foot tall.
Yeah.
They were using it as like a table centerpiece on their talk show,
Yeah.
And so I always thought, on one hand, those are really cool, but on the other hand, like you were saying earlier, if it's a monster that's that big, you're not going to be, your sword's not going to do. You wield a short sword.
Yeah.
You've got daggers.
Yeah.
Your dagger isn't long enough to pierce one of its scales all the way through. You think you're doing structural damage to it?
Yeah.
So then that got me thinking about two things.
Sure.
Kind of an article I saw on, I want to say it was on D&D Beyond.
Sure. Okay.
A while back. Not that long ago. Maybe a couple months. And you ever play the game, God, no, I'm blanking on the, it was one of those Ico games where you were fighting those giant titans, and you had to stab them and they're glowing symbols, but you had to, like, crawl your way up the titan.
Oh, yeah, you're actually, like, you're climbing them.
Yeah, and they're like these big, like, animal-style creatures, and they're covered in runes, and they're just carved from ornate stone and stuff like that, but you had, this whole article was about using weak points. And how your monster will be invulnerable. But during the fight, your PCs, instead of having to just whittle it down like it's a giant bucket of hit points covered by an AC,
right,
instead have to try to figure it out like a puzzle.
Thank you, Sam. Shadow Colossus.
Oh, yeah, Shadow of the Colossus. Thank you.
Perfect.
So, doing things like using Arcana to figure out that there is a rune, there's a rune of invulnerability or something like that. That maybe, if you target it, it's got a higher AC, but it's got a small hit point pool, and if you're able to take it out, things start coming apart for that monster.
Smog has a missing scale on his underside.
Exactly. Things like that. Yeah. Or using the environment. There's a couple of great fights in the second Dark Souls game where you don't really actually kill the boss as much as you put the boss in a position to be defeated.
Okay.
The first one, though you can kill the boss the traditional way, and many people do, is the fight versus the Pursuer. And he's this big knight guy with a giant, like, Buster Sword, Cloud Strife style, sort of thing.
Supersized blade, ridiculous handle.
Ridiculous.
Nobody should be carrying it.
And he one-hands
Of course he does.
And he's a jerk about it.
Yeah.
And but the first time you fight him, there are a couple of ballista in his room, and if you can get him set up just right, and you can get him in front of one of those ballista long enough that you can get behind it and pull the trigger on it, you can two-shot him.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
It's boss, and that's actually how I beat him.
Okay. Okay.
The second one is the Skeleton Chariot.
Sure.
And essentially what that is it's just a big circular room. And there are little alcoves kind of into the walls and stuff like that. And there's like these skeletons coming up out of all over the place. You're just being assailed by just little guys, right? You could fight through them, but the problem is about every 15 seconds or so, the Skeleton Chariot comes by and just mows down anything that's in the hall.
Including them.
If you are including them.
Yeah.
But they'll get back up because they're skeletons.
Right.
They're constantly reforming themselves. They're just bags of bones with swords.
Right.
And they'll try to push you out of the alcoves. And if you're not in one of those alcoves when the chariot comes by, you get mowed down too.
Right.
And eventually what you end up doing is dropping a portcullis in the middle of the thing.
Oh.
And the skeleton chariot can't hit the brakes fast enough and just smashes himself onto this portcullis.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so using clever mechanics like that, instead of whittling down a bag of hit points...
Luke versus the...
Sarlacc. The Rancor.
Rancor.
Yes.
He used...
Precisely like that, using the environment against it, instead of just going into it and hacking it apart with his lightsaber. What's that kind of thing going to do?
Which he didn't have.
Exactly.
So, I mean, that's the kind of thing that you want to have those movies rolling through your head to try and think about how you want to design scenes for players.
Exactly.
To give them opportunities.
Exactly.
What kind of insight, what kind of arcana, what kind of history, are these things are going to give them access to options, and this is just me. I'm putting this out there. If your players are sitting at a table and they're going to be fighting a dragon, again, maybe they come around the corner and between them and their exit is a red dragon. Mm-hmm. They've got to fight it or figure it out. If they just start pulling together insight, investigation, and lore checks and are doing well at them, even if you haven't come up with something, there's nothing to say with, okay, you got a 19 on your investigation check. What do you see? What'd you find? There's stalactites in the ceiling. Excellent. You notice that they're quite sharp and made of a brittle stone at the top. Probably a few good hits or maybe a shatter spell might knock them clean. Mm-hmm. And it's things like that. Give them the opportunity to do a little storytelling with you. You don't have to come up with everything on your own. You don't have to be super sharp on your feet. You can give them a little storytelling option.
Mm-hmm. And it's a negotiation too. I mean, you're still the storyteller, so it's not going to be like, oh, there's a mounted machine gun, and you're just like, oh crap, mounted machine guns don't exist, but they just said mounted machine guns, so I guess they exist now.
Nothing like that.
You can still veto it.
Yeah, you can be like, there isn't a mounted machine gun, but there is a ballista.
But there is an old ballista. You're not sure if it works or not. Give me a check.
Yeah,
exactly.
Could you use it? Do you have the ability to use it? Well, you don't, but the dwarf might. Mm-hmm. Another thing is that there's nothing that says you can say there's a ballista up there, and like, well, none of us know how to use siege weapons. There are 4 cowering dwarves in the corner,
right,
trying to get out the same door you, and they're not going to make it nearly in the run that you are. They might be willing to assist you.
Yeah.
So I like the idea that large scale, like we were saying, and large scale, the two sides of that combat can be handled differently. It doesn't have to be by the table and grid and numbers if you don't want it to be.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be all a point of the sword versus brunt of the skin. It can be a mix. It can be thought-provoking a little bit too.
Knocks on the box in the chat says, we're outgunned. Paladin. What's a gun?
Yeah.
Which is funny to me because Paladin was an old Western show.
Paladin.
Yeah?
Paladin. Yeah.
Paladin knows exactly what a gun is.
Is it? I can't remember because it was from Stand By Me is what taught it to me.
Oh.
Because they sing it. They're singing it as they're walking down the rails.
I don't think I've seen...
we will travel in the heart of a man. A knight without honor in a savage land. Paladin.
I don't know that I've seen Stand By Me all the way through.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a scene where like everybody starts throwing up and I have bad
that's
stomach
definitely,
and
that's definitely in it.
I think I noped right the hell out of that movie.
I can believe it. Now we have a ton of questions to go through.
Oh my God, do we ever?
And that's good because some of them are from the previous week and some of them are definitely on this week as well. So reads the card of a man. I was close.
Knox just posted the entire lyrics of the song. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Sam. We will not say that, but it could be.
All right.
Questions. What do you want to hit? Who do you want to hit first?
Knox has been pretty chatty tonight. Let's start with him.
All right.
All right. So Knox is asking, when scaling character battles in a potentially massive way, should you also scale the firepower your PCs can use against the new threat, i.e. siege weapons on the field for your ranged characters to operate or even beneficial lair actions? I guess it really depends on how you want to run the scene. because kind of like we discussed earlier tonight, your objectives typically in a mass combat are not going to be causing as many casualties as possible.
I'm going to shift your brain just a little bit.
Okay.
So we've talked about where the story is the most important part, but we haven't talked about is when the mass combat is something that's part of the required scene.
That's true.
We haven't talked about the A-team get-together moment. When the music kicks in and they turn the van into like a battle wagon. Yeah, I did that for you, buddy. You better have enjoyed that. So think about it that way. I think in that case, you can do things like that.
Yeah, in that case, look, here's the thing.
Home Alone is another example of it. Where you're
gonna have to explain that one to
You're
me.
setting traps. You're the one setting – the players are the ones setting the stage for the combat.
Okay.
You know, where they're setting it up so that they're preparing for the battle.
Yeah.
They're setting pieces in place. Maybe you do in those cases if it is appropriate. You might set up a siege weapon.
It's yeah, definitely. I can see that. I think the main takeaway for me though is don't focus so much on the numbers.
I agree.
Like, yeah, sure, you may have siege equipment, you may have a catapult or a ballista or a trebuchet or something like that you're firing off, and that's really cool. That's really super epic.
Sure.
But to me though, that's just going to boil down to a story element and not a game mechanic. Like,
Right.
I'm not going to be rolling dice to see how many people you kill with your catapult.
No.
Like, it's just going to be, okay, you guys have a catapult, ergo, you can breach the wall.
Yeah.
And that wall will get you to the next part of the story.
Exactly.
Or, because you've got X amount of siege equipment or you've got, these sort of things in this mass combat.
Right.
The fight's going to end with them decimated rather than them, maybe winning the battle or something like that. But one way or another, though.
You rallied people together.
Yeah.
So now as the guard comes out to stop the four of you, suddenly the courtyard fills with all the musketeers, and as you draw your sword and scream, all for one, they all disrobe and show that they are the musketeers with you in full uniform.
Oh.
Great. Now you're all fighting in a mass combat instead of you against 55 people.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah. So I think it depends. I think it depends on what story you're telling. But yeah, give it a trebuchet.
Just don't worry about the numbers.
Could be cool. Just don't worry about the numbers.
Don't worry about the numbers.
Move the story.
That's right. All right.
You pick one.
I'm going to step into Mad Elf.
Yeah.
So this one I think was a good one that fits scale on two levels, and that is if you're going to run a Kaiju-esque game, what would be your preference for what scale and therefore the scope for the players or the antagonists would work best for you? Transformer size, Ultraman size, Godzilla size, Pacific Rim sized. Yeah. Jumped right over that one, didn't I? Yeah.
Swerved it.
Right to the side. Practically drifted. So what we're talking about here is scale and scope.
Yeah.
And I think, again, it's feel. When you're setting the stage of your story, you're setting the feel. Mm-hmm. Are your characters unworldly, off-worldly, otherworldly, and therefore something of that scale, like a giant mech coming in to blow up the city, isn't a big deal? Mm-hmm. It's big mech versus a big mech, or four smaller mechs that can turn into a group combat mech,
right,
kind of moment. And even then, the rules change for I'm the arm, I'm the leg, I'm the head, You make your roles for different things. So I think it comes down to what scale you want it to be in. What level of epic do you want to set it to? And does it change the way you talk about it? Does it change the way you look at it? Mm-hmm. Because whether you're in micro scale, aka I'm playing a mouse, and I'm dealing with a snake that's 6 times my size and is super fast, or I'm a fighter pilot going against a galactic scale cruiser that has hundreds of the ships of my size stashed in its bowels, or it's 1942 and I'm fighting an aircraft carrier. Mm-hmm. All of these are just scales of scene.
Yeah.
and it's how you look at the feel of the story. How important is it to the feel of the story?
Right. And I think the important thing too is think of what the threat represents. I think when you're asking the question of if you're telling a kaiju-esque story, you're discussing a giant creature like that, to me, thematically, something like a kaiju represents like the inevitability of destruction.
I agree.
And there's nothing you're going to do about that.
Nope.
Your city is getting destroyed. It's all about what you make of that experience.
Ragnarok.
Exactly. Are you going to get out? What are you going to salvage? What are you going to do afterwards?
Yep.
You're not going to alter the destruction here.
Yeah.
But the story is crap's going to hell in a handbasket, and you need to figure some stuff out right now because it's happening.
What's important to you? Because this ain't ending.
Exactly. So I mean, to me, it fundamentally alters the storytelling at that point. Then, if I can fight it back, a big fan of survival horror games back in the day, and I always took people always pit Silent Hill versus Resident Evil against each other.
Yeah.
And I always fell on the Silent Hill end of things because in Resident Evil they give you like a machine gun and you can mow down zombies with it. And in Silent Hill I had a board with a nail in it
Or a flashlight.
and a radio that screeched at me.
Yeah.
And like a pistol with 12 bullets.
Maybe.
It
Yeah.
wasn't until much later in the game you got a rifle. And the horror factor for me came in not being able to fight back, and that's where I was going with this.
Right.
The moment you can fight back against something, it's
Fear drops.
It's just a threat to. It's just an obstacle to be beaten at that point.
Yeah.
But the inevitability of it coming in and just destroying everything and you not being able to do anything about it, that's a complete mood shift. That's a complete story shift for you.
Yep.
So yeah, if you're doing any size scale like that, that's the first thing you need to determine. What's the end result you're aiming for? What's the mood you're aiming for?
I agree. You pick one.
All right. Technolich. Let's see here. As a storyteller, do you find yourself ever using NPC in a serial manner that crosses over from setting to setting, campaign to campaign, like a touchstone for your long-term players?
I'm not answering this one. Go ahead.
Okay.
This is all you.
I don't know that I have an NPC, but I have a village.
Okay.
There is a granite ridge in every single one of my games.
Awesome.
It doesn't matter where you are. The village of Granite Ridge shows up somewhere. I don't think it's showed up in my game yet. But
no, I would recognize that.
Rest assured, it's going to be there.
In my 7th Sea games, I've always brought a couple characters, and one that shows up pretty regularly is Padre Inguis. He's just a priest. Sometimes he's an inquisitor. Sometimes he's early in his career. Sometimes he's late in his career. Sometimes he's a professor late in his career. And so I always bring him back because you guys always remember who he is.
Yeah.
Even though you're totally different characters, as players, you're excited to see Padre Inguis.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. And then all the girls at the table sigh.
That's right. But that's the thing and that's not even a character that's part of 7th Sea. That's a character I made. There are characters that I bring back, because they're known people.
Sure.
And they of the world, and they're kind of known actors, I guess you could say, within the story. But that would be mine. I think Padre Inguis would be the one for me. So definitely,
yeah, I think it's great. I like having those moments where you're like, oh yeah, I remember that. It's great.
Nice.
You hit another Mad Elf one?
Sure.
Because he hit like 4 questions to us.
How about some brainstorming for dungeon crawl stories in a system without dungeons?
Oh, I think anything's a dungeon if you complicate it enough.
Well, I see a dungeon as an explorational area.
Yeah.
Plus a little bit of mystery or question.
Yeah.
And concern.
Exploration.
The keep I gave you guys was a dungeon crawl.
Yeah, exactly. I think so
Mm-hmm.
exploration plus mystery plus a little environmental danger. That's a dungeon.
Yeah,
right there.
I'm in a town that's vacant.
Mm-hmm.
That's a dungeon.
Look, Shadowrun. Shadowrun's not traditionally a dungeon crawling game. It's a cyberpunk game that takes place in the 2050s.
Right.
Or thereabouts, anyways. I know the timelines move on. I think it's like 2070 something now.
Yeah.
But anyways, cyberpunk thing. But like, if you go to a medical facility, to steal some science secrets for whatever, corporate, espionage you're executing.
Yeah.
And you find when you find out when you get there, you find out that some of the experiments have gone awry and things are not as they seem.
Right.
Now you're lurking through this thing with like mysterious, weird mutant creatures lurking around in the shadows, red klaxons going off, and like half of the hallways are sealed with like blast security doors, and you need to crawl through air vents and stuff like that to get from place to place to place to complete your objective.
Or find security keys.
Yeah, that's a dungeon crawl.
That's a dungeon crawl.
That's a dungeon crawl, and you just did it in Shadowrun.
Yeah. I mean, anytime, again, like you said, anytime there's a mystery involved, like I don't care what the world is, you come into a town and it is silent.
Yeah.
There's not a soul there.
And covered in fog?
Maybe.
Hey.
Maybe. So that can be a dungeon crawl right there. Go ahead, grab another one.
All right. Let's see here. Let's go back to Technolich. Technolich asks a second question. Do you find the group dynamics of players who know each other IRL, in real life, versus players who only know each other through the game to affect gameplay? And do you prefer one type over the other? It absolutely affects gameplay.
Oh, yeah. Without a doubt.
Your PCs who know each other out of game and are comfortable with each other out of game and are friends are going to feel far more comfortable at the table, far more comfortable to get into emotional topics, to get to even just role playing in general. If you're not comfortable with the other players at the table, there's a tendency to kind of wheel your role play back a little bit, be a little conservative with it, rather than, lean straight into the goofy accent and start talking about the deep, dark past of your character.
I think it also makes for interactions between characters awkward. Because, for instance, if, I come into a game, and I've done this, I've come into other people's games where I've joined them, and I start playing off of the other players. Sometimes I get like, well, what are you saying? Like, are you like interested in me or something? No, like my character's just that way. He's flirty with everybody. Like he's an equal opportunity player.
Right.
And it's like, that's an awkward moment right there that now you have to kind of figure out, like now you can't play the character that way. Or maybe there's something, or, you get those situations where you have a player who's very fun and likes bringing a lot of inter-player combat or discussions in, where they might start doing gimmicky things to each other, or stealing things or, whatever to create that. And now people are pissed off. Why are you doing this in the game? Like, no, it's just my character. That's what they are. They're a tiny goblin who likes stealing shiny things, and you had it. So, like,
if you don't know each other, then,
it's awkward.
It's awkward and could quite possibly create a lot of conflict between your players. And
very much so. So, yeah, I totally agree. But it's hard to get to that point. But I think it's semi-necessary.
Yeah.
Like playing, I will say, when I was at Gen Con with the guys and we played the D&D game, we really didn't get to know the other people at the table at all.
Yeah.
Whatsoever. But it was nice that we were all together.
Sure.
When we went to the Shadowrun game, I have no idea. The only thing that made an impression on me were the two drunk guys who were sitting next to me just effing around the entire time that we were there. They did not give two shits what we were doing. I think they were just getting through the mission.
Yeah.
Just to have it done.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Yeah.
All right, I think we got time to squeeze one more in. We just got the 3-minute warning.
Okay.
So we'll go back to the Mad Elf. Let's see here. What do you think about scaling a game to have multiple PVs? I'm assuming that's point of views for each player. Everyone plays a command officer at the strategic level and a frontline soldier.
I think that's a lot to control.
Yeah.
I like the idea from 7th Sea where you've got positions on the boat and then they're seeing what the effects of that are.
Yeah.
But I think trying to mix both of those in would be good for maybe an opening of a story.
Yeah, I could see like jumping around different perspectives for just to get a narrative out into the air, but
like I could do that for 7th Sea, but I would do it differently. Like I might set up a scene where like I tell them who they are, where they are and what they're doing, and then that affects maybe a group of somebodies, and the whole group plays a scene together as somebody other than their players, than their actual characters. And then I move to another person and they explain something, and then there's a scene that gets played along with that.
I did that one time. On a kind of side note, because this wasn't a multiple point of view thing, but this was one of my D&D parties hired some mercenaries to go get some rare components for them for some spell.
So you had them play it.
I had a one shot. They were the mercenaries and went to go collect the component.
There you go.
So that was pretty cool.
So it's possible. It's challenging. I would think it would be, with the right group, it could be good.
Yep. All right, so next week we are talking about contemporary games, games set in the modern era. So you can find us online at st_conclave, on Instagram also at st_conclave, on Discord. You can find the link to that in our Twitter and on every episode description in your favorite podcast listening software. And I want to just say, hit us up on either Instagram or on Twitter. Show us some pictures of your games. Let's see what you're doing.
Keep posting with that. We'd like to thank our Patreon members, Knox and Sam's especially, and all of our other Patreon members who help us out every week and make this show better every time and easier for both myself and Sarah to get through it. Our intro music is Beyond the Warriors by Geefrog. You can find that at geefrogmusic.weebly.com. Our outro music is Only Our Footprints in the Sand by Midair Machine. You can find that at soundcloud.com/midairmachine/tracks.
We record every week at Podcast Detroit. You can find them online at podcastdetroit.com, on Twitter at Podcast Detroit, and our engineer is Caitlin. She is lovely and wonderful.
We'd like to thank our families. You have been so supportive of us, and soon we will be having some fun with them as well. Secrets to come. But we'd like to thank our friends and our families who play 7th Sea and D&D and Shadowrun and all the games that make everything wonderful.
And of course, we want to thank every single one of our listeners. We love you. Thank you.